All right, what's going on YouTube? Today I'm going to get into rock dust. And now rock dust is a heavily discussed topic in the art of gardening and horticulture and hydroponics growing. So there's a lot of things we need to clarify about this. And now rock dust is a complex reaction with the soil. And that's the main thing you got to consider when it comes to this. Like rock dust fall in families. And now the family is crucially important when it comes to using your rock dust. You have your sedimentary family, which has the St. George's black, and has some of the glacial rock dust, which is ground down, variety of lots of different rocks. Some sedimentary, mafic, felsic is kind of an assortment. It's a rock compost that's from glacial action. And you have your green sand, which is a glauconitic deposit, kind of greenish, brownish, different colors. It has some potassium to nil, about 20-something trace elements. So honestly, green sand is decent, but I prefer felsic volcanic rocks. But, in the sedimentary family, now the green sand has been extensively marketed and pushed out there. And it's been used since the 1700s, so we need to get into what this really does. And now green sand has a high amount of iron in it. The iron oxides and the silicates are in this. So then it falls flat. I mean, it has some of these, but the reason I don't use green sand so much when I do gardening is because green sand is less paramagnetic than volcanic rock. And now, is all volcanic rock extremely paramagnetic? No, not at all. And we will get into that next. But now some of the best sedimentary rocks to use. Now they've pushed green sand and glacial rock dust, but those two are average, and there's better stuff that works better, like by a long shot. So one of them is humic shale, or leonardite, or oxidized lignite coal. And this is pyrolyzed, pressurized carbon into humic acid that actually increases the amount of trace elements and nutrients a plant can take up out of the soil. And guess what? It also has a lot of trace elements, way more than green sand, because it came from living plants. So pyrolyzed plants, or biochar, or humic shale. A lot of this pyrolyzed carbon actually has a good adsorption property in the soil. It really enhances the quality of the soil. Microbes can use it. It has this great effect. Like if I'm going to use humic shale, I mix it with a volcanic rock. And I mix a bunch of these things together and add some biochar, and you can have a really good soil component, like a super soil. People talk about earthworm castings and kelp, and a lot of other things that really work well, but biochar may be even better. Like history and science will say that biochar may be the single thing that you really want to add to your soil. Like it'll make things grow like weeds. So that's definitely something that, is one of my favorite things. And, now there's St. George's black. And this is kind of, in my mind, it kind of looks like a hybrid rock because it's maybe sedimentary shale. But the good thing about this stuff is it has a good amount of trace elements, and it's a good soil sweetener. And so it helps neutralize the pH, has good alkali elements and a whole spectrum. And so it has a really good aging effect in soil. And it's a Vermont shale. It's very hard to find. There's only one site on the internet that sells this stuff, but it's been getting rave reviews. It's one of these rock dusts that anybody that finds this mineral complex, they tend to rave on it. And so, that's one. And, people have also used limestone dust. Now, limestone or lime is a stronger base. So it basically has this effect of neutralizing the acid in soil. And so it's basically calcium carbonate or crushed aragonite. And so, basically in the sedimentary rocks, you have your clay particles, which are ground rock, that are ground into very small particles, and they get pressurized into shale, and some of those tend to be real good regional characters. And then you have your sandstones, and then you have your calcium carbonate oriented limestone. And so it's good to have hybrid rocks. And now this is where basically when you are growing with any kind of rock dust, you got to look at the complex soil chemistry and geology behind a lot of this, because basically when you are growing, you want to think of biodynamics. And so next, how are we going to be biodynamic? You want to use volcanic rocks. And felsic and mafic and intermediate are the three basic categories in the volcanic realm, because you'll have intermediate rocks like andesite that are really, they're kind of in that gray. They're not extremely dark, but they're not light felsic rocks. And now what's the difference between a mafic and felsic rock on either side? Well, the mafic rocks have higher iron and magnesium and higher alkali elements and less silicon dioxide, less of the glassy components, so they are much darker in appearance. And the felsic rocks tend to be much lighter. And so now when it comes to mafic versus felsic rocks, there's advantages to each. Like mafic rocks are more paramagnetic. They have more of the trace elements and more of the magnesium and iron, and titanium, which are highly paramagnetic. And what is paramagnetic? Paramagnetic means this force of magnetism from metals and other components. And there's certain earth elements that are more paramagnetic than others, and certain forms of everything that are paramagnetic. And so you get into the mafic side of volcanic rocks, and basalt's probably the best rock dust. Besides St. George's Black and humic shale, basalt goes high up. It obviously, a geologist will tell you basalt is one of the best things for mineralization. And you can, on the other end of the spectrum, you can use things like zeolite and pumice and azomite and granite dust. And the felsic rocks have more potassium and more aluminum and silicates. And so it's good to, I'll crush up some granite rocks and I'll mix that with azomite and basalt and then some andesite, but I'll try and give a full spectrum. And I try and give a full spectrum alternating between volcanic rocks and biochar, and I tend to get good results because both of those will help make any soil way better. And how do they do this? Well, the volcanic rocks create biodynamic properties in soil, and they help have pores where the bacteria can grow and break down soil particles into suitable humus and nutrients for plants. And you also have cation exchange where things are readily available. And you can have soil with lots of nutrients, but the plant has to expand its roots greatly just to get those nutrients. And if you had the volcanic rocks and more of the nutrient transfer and more bacterial action, you'd have plants growing like weeds in a very paramagnetic medium. And paramagnetic soil and a lot of those rock dusts will build a solid plant that is much more viable. They have more drought tolerance, heat tolerance, cold hardiness. It helps increase the range of a plant. If it's out of its zone, you might be able to make a specimen into an almost native plant just by using paramagnetic soil. And it enhances soil microbes, so you have readily supplying nutrients to a plant. And, this is one of those things that, now, are volcanic rocks the only paramagnetic thing? No. In high temperatures, like a lot of times you have the formation of, like when they pyrolyze wood into biochar, you have a lot of these different trace minerals, and you have this paramagnetic mixture that makes a super soil. And it weathers and helps supply bacteria, which do the rest and really create a living medium. And you need a living medium where nutrients can be transferred to the plant and back and forth. And one bacteria may break down some of the components out of volcanic rock, and another one uses the byproducts, and they further break it down into chain reaction. And so azomite, now this one has been advertised heavily, and azomite is more on the felsic side. It has about 0.2% potassium, but look at the silicon dioxide content of azomite versus basalt. And we'll see which one's felsic and which one's mafic. And that's exactly how you use them. Like you look at what the composition is and the effect on the soil. And, the felsic rocks like rhyolite with the gem garnet fractions, and the felsic side will have this good side with the potash and potassium, which helps with cold hardiness too. So, the felsic and mafic both together create a super soil medium that will make plants live a very long time. And so now azomite has a lot of mineralization, but it's more of a felsic volcanic ash deposit. And the basalts, depending on the regional one, you can have some super basalt soil components. So, those are basically some of the best rock dusts. And now you got to look at, when you're looking at paramagnetism, everything's paramagnetic. But you got to look at the amount of paramagnetism that you have in a rock, because you can have some oxidized scoria rocks that have very little paramagnetism, that have already been leached out of their iron and their magnesium and all these components. And you can have other rocks that are much more fresh and paramagnetic, where they come from a good source of magma. And where it comes to these rocks and volcanic deposits, it's like oil refining, and where you have different fractions at different temperatures, at different compositions, and everything. And then they have that effect on the soil. And volcanic rocks help with water retention. Like, I've considered green sand, and then I found andesite mineral complex. I was looking on this geology site, and they were talking about how andesite has helped with water retention in soil. And there's certain soils in some of the most productive regions of the world that have andesite. And that is one of the components that really builds a super soil. And so andesite is really one of the best rock dusts, but it's never been really pushed out there. And basalt is the other one. And so now people are considering zeolite, because zeolite has a strong cation exchange and absorption. Now, it's not very paramagnetic, but it does have those effects. So if you were planting like a plant that needs a lot of water to maintain osmotic pressure, and turgor pressure, where you don't want the soil to dry out or it's going to wilt, then you may want to use some zeolites. I oftentimes crush the zeolite and mix it in with my strawberry soil. So that way you can kind of have that water retention in the soil. And like if it was 100-degree weather, they wouldn't be wilting as fast, and you would have more water retained in that soil. And so I usually, I'll top dress with some azomite clay, and then, you bury some zeolites, and, it'll retain a lot of rainwater and slowly release it over time. And if the soil has too many nutrients, it'll absorb some and then slowly release it, and it helps maintain stabilized levels of everything in the soil. And so zeolites are really good at that. And now volcanic rocks have always been found to have more and more function in soil. And it's not just direct fertility, but it creates a lot of situations in the soil that can make plants grow like weeds. So, basically this is my video on rock dust, and thanks for watching.